Morning. Good morning. How's everyone this morning? Bear with me a couple of seconds here, okay? Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to do that. I've got a new device, and I'm trying it out this morning. We'll see what happens. But you know what? Sometimes, ladies, you know it. You know it as well as anybody does. Sometimes men are just dummies. Do we realize that? How about it, boys? Do we realize that sometimes we men are just dummies? We think we got everything under control, 100%, everything right and ready. And what happens? Something happens at the very last minute to screw things up. Well, I got this new device. Man, it's going to be easier. Easier than falling off a slick log backwards. Get this thing all taken care of. Well, that'd be all right, except for one thing. I couldn't find out where. I couldn't find out how to get to the scheduled events on it. So, yes, I'm just a dummy. Just a dummy. So, here we are anyway, though. I tried to be as quick as possible. I think I did pretty good. Uh, Anybody wondering what I'm talking about? I got an iPad, 128 gig iPad, and that's what we're showing this on this morning. That's what I'm broadcasting on. So here we go. Hold on. Looks better on my end, but my goodness, you're looking at me, so it can't look much better on your end. Yes, I can read the messages. They come up individually, though, not like on a PC, where you've got a string of them. So if I don't look at them quick, I'm going to miss them. You in the dummy camp, too, are you, brother? Well, I tell you what, I think most of us are. If we have that male gender, we tend to ride in on that side of the bus for the dummies. We're still in Galatians 1. And I'm going to begin here with the 15th verse and read to the end of the chapter. Y'all can also see I got rid of them broke glasses. Well, I didn't get rid of them. I'm just not using them today. I got this pair. They're a little bigger. Some good things about that. Some bad things. That's neither here nor there. I'm debating which version to read this from, is what I'm doing. What's my choices? Well, just like about usual, I got a Geneva, and I've got the New King James, both of them in the Byzantine text tradition. Uh, I think I'm going to read it first from the New King James, and we'll go from there. Forgive my yawn. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb, and called me through his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately confer with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went to Arabia and returned again to Damascus. Then, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter, and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Now concerning the things which I write to you, indeed before God I do not lie. Afterward I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was unknown by face to the churches of Judea which were in Christ. But they were hearing only, he who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith which he once tried to destroy, and the glorified God in me. So, here we are at the end of chapter 1. Paul has been sort of defending himself throughout this chapter, giving some of his experience, telling them what they probably already knew. You know, I have no doubt but what as Paul taught the churches that were started under his ministry, that he stayed there and he gave them counsel, and in it he spoke of his experience, and I'm sure the people that were there spoke of theirs. Before this, he just told them about how he had profited in the Jews' religion above his equals, above many of his equals. And that he was more exceeding zealous for the traditions of the fathers than anyone else. And then he throws that little conjunction in there, but. He couldn't stay there. He couldn't continue in that way. He couldn't. Well, why not? He was going to have something happen to him that would change everything. Listen. But when it pleased God, there's 4 very important words that you and I need to keep in mind all the time. When it pleased God. Not a second before, not a second late. But at the time when it was most pleasing, and when it would please the Father in heaven and in earth, the controller of things in heaven and in earth, when it pleased God, it's a shame I haven't put these on for that. When it pleased God to reveal his Son in me, now, he throws a couple of little things in there descriptive of this beforehand. It pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb. Now you think about this for just a second, brethren. Think about it long and hard. Anybody looking at Saul of Tarsus as he was sitting at the feet of Gamaliel, learning the tradition of the fathers, learning the ways of the elders, getting everything together, so to speak, in his mind and in his heart and in his life, that he might be the greatest among the Jews of that day. This one had been separated from his mother's womb. You couldn't tell it by outward appearance, is what I'm going by. Or if you were a Jew and you were a contemporary and you were in the same place and you were looking at him, well, yeah, you might be able to tell it. You might say that. You might think it, but for the wrong reason. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? You might look at him and agree with with Saul of Tarsus that that this stuff needed to be done, this stuff needed to be done away with, that the traditions needed to be upheld, and these usurping upstart Nazarenes, the sect of the Nazarenes they were called at times, something needed to be done about them. And you might look at Saul of Tarsus and say, man, God must have had a purpose in him from the time he was born. Is that what you would have said? Probably. He's been right and wrong at the same time. God did separate him from his mother's womb, but it wasn't for that. Although that becomes a part of it. We'll look at this, and that becomes a part of it. You know, I think I read this once before. What the Lord said to Jeremiah, the very first thing that it's recorded that the Lord said to Jeremiah, he said, the word of the Lord came to me saying, this Jeremiah 1:4 and following, before I formed thee in the womb, I knew thee. And before thou camest out of the womb, I sanctified thee, I separated thee, and ordained thee to be a prophet unto the nations. Now that is interesting language, isn't it? Because the nations, when it's used in the Old Testament prophecies particularly, mean the Gentiles. Jeremiah wasn't just a prophet to his own people, he was a prophet to all of them. So there. He was separated, he was sanctified before he came out of the womb. Jeremiah was. So was Paul. Do you think Paul might have had that text in mind as he wrote that or dictated it? When we get to the end, we'll see there of the book of Galatians. We think there's some controversy over whether Paul dictated this one or wrote it down himself, but it doesn't matter. It's his words. When it pleased God who separated me from my mother's womb. See, this was what? A chosen vessel. He was a chosen vessel. God set his love on him. God set his power on him. And God kept him. We're going to get into something now. What are we getting into? Well, if you're Arminian, if you're conditionalist, you're not going to like this. Scripture talks about the book of Isaiah. Speaks of Cyrus, the heathen king. Not an Israelite. Not even based on anything we can read, one of God's elect. But God said he held his right hand. Said he held the hand of Cyrus. All the while, Cyrus was attacking Israel and before. Think of this. For God to bring Cyrus to the point of fulfilling the prophecy of coming against Israel, taking Jerusalem, etc., etc., God had to mark out and control every event in the life of Cyrus. From the time he came forth from the womb and before, his mother couldn't have had an abortion. She couldn't have miscarried. He had to come forth. She couldn't have named him Billy Ray. He had to be named Cyrus. Because it was Cyrus whose hand God held. Think about that. That everything in his life brought him to that point. Same way with Paul. He was separated from his mother's womb. He must sit at the feet of Gamaliel. He must learn more of the law and know it as well or better than any of his contemporaries. He must go to the stoning of Stephen and approve it. Well, now you're getting deep now. Yes. Yes, it is. Think of this. God led Saul to Gamaliel. God led him before that. Said he was separated from his mother's womb. Every event that happened in the life of Saul, up until the point he's introduced in scriptures to us, every event was absolutely necessary and was the exact thing that God wanted to happen to prepare him for what he was to do later. Including, it's tough, brethren, including bringing him to the stoning of Stephen and including his approval of it. Man, that was a sin. Well, sure it was. When they took up stones to cast at Stephen, and they pelted him with those rocks till he was dead, graveyard dead, there's old Saul saying, "Go to it, boys. Give me your coats. Grab a rock. It's not worthy that such an one should live. Take care of him." He had to be there. And he had to approve it. We can't say that God used Satan to do it. We can't say that, like he did with Job. We can't say God sent a lying spirit down to him like he did to Ahab's prophets. All we know is that God brought him there and put that approval in his heart. And then, because he was so well versed in the Jews' religion, and because he had such a zeal for the tradition of the fathers, so much that so he could state later that as touching the righteousness of the law, in other words, as touching that, concerning that, righteousness, which can come by man's actions, and which can come through man's duties. I was blameless. He's saying I was perfect. I was as perfect as the law could make you, and zealous for the tradition of my fathers. So much so that when I saw these upstart Nazarites following this way that I believed with all my heart was false, I went after them because I thought I did God's service in it. God brought him that way. He had to go that way. Think of this. Think of this. We talked about Osiris, right? God says, I'm leading him, though he doesn't know me. God was leading Saul, though at the time Saul thought he knew him, but really he didn't, did he? If he'd have known him, he wouldn't have to ask who that was come to him on the road to Damascus. You with me? Have I gone too far? Have I pushed God into being the author of sin? Lordy. No, I'll tell you what. God determined the sinful actions of the Apostle Paul just like he determined the sinful actions of you and me and everybody else on this earth. It's not sin for him to do it. We've said it before, and if we're blessed to live and speak, we'll say it again. What kind of law are you putting God under to define sin for him? He has a right to put man under law, doesn't he? Define sin for man. But old man, hey, are you going to do it? You think yourself capable of putting yourself up there above God so that you could define sin for him? Oh, vanity of vanities. To think you can make God anything by your words, your actions, whatever. He is what he is. And no, the term author of sin is nowhere used in the Bible, and we should strip it from our vocabulary, either to say that's what somebody's doing or try to defend ourselves against it. It's Armenian language. Down deep in our hearts, we know that, even if we're using it. But let's come up here. Let's get back to where I was going. You got Cyrus, who's being led in the paths of unrighteousness. You got Saul, who's being led in the path of sin. Both of them. Cyrus comes up to destroy Jerusalem, doesn't he? And he does a pretty dadgum good job of it. Why? Because God said, open to him the two-leaved gates and let him come in. Let the waster destroy. You know, that's another thing. God said it, that he created the waster to destroy. But I'm going to field because we gotta compare these two men, the king and the apostle. God looks at Cyrus. Read it in Isaiah. Read that prophecy. Read it when we're done here. He says, because thou saidest in thy heart, my hand has done this, and I've come against Israel, and I have done these things, I'm going to destroy you too. Showing Cyrus's reprobate nature. How'd God know Cyrus was going to say that? Hint to the wise is sufficient. It ain't because he just looked ahead and saw that would happen. Well, here's Saul, breathing out fire and threatenings, destroying the people of God, just like Cyrus was destroying the people of God in the Old Testament times and was carrying them away captive. Saul was doing the same thing, wasn't he? He had letters in hand. He says, I'm going to go. I've done all I can do in Jerusalem. Give me a bigger field to work in. Sound like a missionary, doesn't he? I've done all I can do here. Now let me get on the road. There's bigger places. I'm going to Damascus. Are you with me? And they said, well, here's some letters of authority. So get yourself on down there. He said, I'm going to haul them in chains and bring them back here if I find any of this way. Cyrus was to be destroyed for his sin. Saul was to be saved from his sin. They mark out the two lines, elect and reprobate. Nothing in their actions up until the points show any different. But look at the language that Paul used here. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me through his grace, he was separated, he was called. To reveal his Son in me. Oh, my goodness. Such thought, such grace. Such grace given to one who was doing what? Wasting the people of God. All right. We got the difference in the two. Got them laid out plain right there. One was called by grace. See, when it pleased, God had separated him. God called him by grace. And then he revealed his Son, God's Son, in Paul. And remember, brethren, Remember, friends, this is our pattern. This is our pattern. Got a separation, got a calling, and more than that, we got a revelation. Because I'm going to tell you what. It's the only way you can know it. Called. Well, yes, he was called. Of course he was called. Don't you know Ananias went to him and called him? Well, my goodness gracious. I believe the way this reads, when it pleased God who separated me and called me. Would Ananias stand for you calling him God? No, Paul had no thought that Ananias did the calling. Ananias didn't reveal Jesus to him. Jesus revealed himself to him, didn't he? Who art thou, Lord? Who art thou? I'm Jesus who you're persecuting. It's hard for you to kick against the bricks. How hard? Evidently mighty hard, huh? All this was for a purpose. That I might preach it among the Gentiles. Man, oh man. If Paul was zealous for the traditions above his equals, what do you think he thought of a Gentile back then? Do some looking on that, how the first century Jews thought Gentiles. But Paul here again, Paul went through all that he went through in his life up until that point for a reason. That he might know the law, that he might know what it takes to fulfill the law, and to know that that's not good enough. They believe they were pagan and still. That's at best, brother. At best, they're pagan. Goyim, cattle, dogs. Pretty rough words for the time against those people, against these people, the Gentiles. I don't know whether this is going to apply or not, but I'm going to say it anyway. If I'm off, well, forgive me. Back a few years ago, there was a show on HBO or Showtime or something called Deadwood. And it got really got people really upset because of the language used in it, the cursing and the foul language that was in it. And it was asked in one of the, it was about old Deadwood, South Dakota in the Wild West time when Wild Bill Hickok was killed there. And was it saloon number 10? So many saloons they just numbered them. Anyway, so there was a question in one of the Western history magazines. And the question was, did they really talk that way back then? And the answer was no, they didn't. And they went to the producer and director and writers of the show and said, well, we know this isn't the way it really happened. Why'd you do this? And they said, well, it's because the words and the phrases that they used in the 1880s would be considered so innocuous today that we had to pick something with as much shock value as their language would have had then. Now, I say that to say this, that when you call somebody a dog today or, whatever, it doesn't mean much. Back then, it meant a whole lot more. A whole lot more. That's what we don't understand. Is we can understand sometimes how the language we use daily, English, if we're English speakers, whatever language you use daily, how it's changed over the years. And it has changed, hasn't it? Words take on different meanings. Words take on different connotations. Well, we don't realize how bad some of these things really were. Calling you a dog, calling you a pagan, calling you cattle. So think about that. But that's what Saul would have thought of the Gentiles. Kind of what Peter thought, wasn't it? Great sheet coming down, he's up there on the housetop. Knit at the four corners, opened up, all manner of unclean beasts. Rise, Peter, kill and eat. Oh no, Lord. Now think about that. Peter knew that the hand of the Lord and the voice of the Lord, the hand of the Lord brought that to him, and the voice of the Lord was telling him that. Because he said, no, Lord, I've never eaten anything common or unclean. I ain't going to do it. The Lord said, what I've cleansed, don't you call unclean or common. Well, see, that all happened just because Peter was real hungry, and he got up there, and he didn't really fall into a trance. He just kind of drifted off to sleep and dreamed it. Yeah, right. It came again, and it came again. And then the Gentiles came to him from Cornelius. And Peter realized that that wasn't about food. That was about people. And what God had cleansed, he wasn't to call common and unclean, even if it was a Gentile. We was to preach him among the Gentiles. So what happened? So Paul went to seminary, got his master's. He'd already got his bachelor's from the College of Gamaliel. So now he went to seminary to get his master's, and maybe continue on and get a doctorate, so that he could write pretty things to the saints of God. He says, I did not immediately confer with flesh and blood. The Geneva puts the comma in a different place, by the way. I think this is very interesting. But when it pleased God, which had separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I should preach him among the Gentiles immediately. In other words, the Geneva Bible says that Paul was to preach immediately. I communicated not with flesh and blood. I didn't ask anybody anything. That's something, isn't it? That's confidence. That's confidence that comes by knowing who spoke to you. That's confidence that comes by knowing what your calling is. That's why I said if somebody's called to go to Timbuktu or inner city of Detroit or Ketchikan, Alaska. It doesn't matter. Get to going. If you know who called you and you know what he's called you to do, confer not with flesh and blood. All right. I tell you, in 1981, I went to the Eastern Shore on my usual trip, Eastern Shore of Maryland. Go to the Wells Tract Church, be with the brethren. The pool got sick while I was there, hospitalized for a short time. And as I was ready to depart, he asked me if I'd pray about coming out there and ministering. I conferred not with flesh and blood. Didn't ask a soul about it. Didn't bring it up till I was ready to go. First Sunday in September, I believe it was. No. Second Sunday in September, I guess it was. I was out there. I stayed out there for years. But what I'm getting at is I conferred not with flesh and blood. I told people after the fact, after the Lord had confirmed me in the decision, at least I believe he did. But beforehand I didn't. I did not confer with flesh and blood. Paul didn't either. Listen to what else he said. Neither came I again to Jerusalem. He came from Jerusalem, was going to Damascus. He didn't say, I didn't go back to Jerusalem. To those who were apostles before me. But I went into Arabia and turned again into Damascus. Some people say the Arabia he went to was the desert, the Arabian desert. It may well be, just as Arabia. What did he do? He learned. Well, what did he learn? Who taught him? Doesn't say he saw any Christians. Certainly doesn't say he saw any preachers. The Arabian elders, I don't think, were the object of his visit. No. He went to learn from Jesus Christ. He went to the source. How many of us do that? Yes, I know. Sometimes it's a whole lot quicker and easier to take a peek at Dr. Gill, Dr. Hodge, Dr. Owen, Dr. Goodwin. Better look to Dr. Jesus. Went to Arabia and returned again to Damascus. Then, after 3 years, think about that, after 3 years. Now you would think, a man like Paul, who knew about hierarchy. Think about this with me. This just kind of came to me. And Paul knew about hierarchy, didn't he? He knew about the high priest and priests and the Levites, and scribes and the teachers, and doctors of the law. He knew about the various sects of Judaism, particularly the Pharisees, because he was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. And naturally, he knew about the Sadducees. If there were any other sects, I believe he knew about them as well. That's part of the profiting in the Jews' religion above his equals. He knew about hierarchy. Well, Paul, you should have got yourself to headquarters. You should have got yourself over to Pope Peter and let the Papa define your doctrine for you. Or maybe you should have gone to Pastor James there, Church of Jerusalem. You know, that's the mother church. You know, some people says, it was just commented on today. Where's the word author of sin found in the Bible? Well, it's not. Find me the words mother church. Can't find the concept of that in the Bible, just like you can't find author of sin concept in the Bible. But I digress. Didn't go to either one of them. If there was a hierarchic structure in the churches of Christ at that time, and we're talking the apostolic age, which we believe as Baptists to be a pattern for us today. Well, for the church at all times, isn't it? It isn't just yesterday and today. It's yesterday, today, and as long as the world stands. Our pattern is the apostolic model. Well, where's that hierarchy? Where's the one that's over everything? There's not one, is there? He spent 3 years in Damascus. Well, probably. The way it's worded leads me to believe that. I don't know how long he was in Arabia. He left Damascus and went to Arabia, then came back to Damascus, and that whole process after 3 years. And because of the then that does it, I think there was 3 years in Damascus, and we don't know how long the period of time in Arabia was. I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and remained with him 15 days. He had enough time to spread error throughout the whole known world, didn't he? 3 years. No, he was confident. Because the gospel that he preached, what did he say earlier, I believe, in this same book? The gospel which was preached by me is not according to man, for I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but it came through the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's why he didn't need to go up to Peter before that. But he did go. He went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Saw Peter, stayed with him for 15 days and saw James in that time period. He didn't see any of the other apostles. He says, I witness that I'm not lying in this. This is just the way it was. And after that, I went to the coasts of Syria and Cilicia. Syria and Cilicia. So, we know that in the 13th chapter of Acts, he was sent from the church at Antioch in Syria, right? That's where he went. Went up to Syria, went to Cilicia. And for I was unknown by face unto the churches of Judea, which were in Christ. So the churches in Judea around Jerusalem, in that region, he didn't visit them. We'll go over just a second. To the 15th chapter of the book of Acts. And there they are. Paul and Barnabas against certain ones that from Judea that taught, saying, except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, can't be saved. Said this. I went down there to have them look at this. Look at what? The apostles and the elders came together to consider, because certain of the Pharisees came in there. Peter talking about how God first chose for the Gentiles to hear the gospel through him. James answered, saying, trouble not them of the Gentiles that are turned to God. Moses has all of them that read, that he's read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. That's right, isn't it? I wrote him a letter. You know, I find it very interesting in that letter, and forgive me for being, for diverting a little bit here. But it seemed good to the Holy Ghost and to us to lay no more burden upon you than those necessary things. That is, that you abstain from things offered to idols and blood, and that is strangled, and from fornications, from which if you keep yourselves, you shall do well, fare ye well. And that's a short letter, isn't it? Well, that's not quite all he wrote. He says, you know, some have cumbered your mind. We've done all this. We're sending you our beloved brother Paul and Barnabas, our beloved Barnabas and Paul. And we're sending Judas and Silas with them so that, you know this is the truth. Poor James. Poor Peter. You know, the church is assembled here with the apostles and elders. When they read it, they rejoiced for the consolation. And Judas and Silas, being prophets, exhorted the brethren with many words and strengthened them. James, you erred greatly. That was great as far as it went. But you didn't enjoin the Sabbath on the Gentiles. You didn't tell them, now, brethren, the first day of the week is the Sabbath now, and you need to keep it as holy as we used to keep that seventh-day Sabbath. Think about that. If that was as important as our modern Pharisees, yes, I'll say it, our modern Pharisees, whether they bear the name Baptist or Presbyterian, it doesn't matter. Whatever they are. Not worried about that. But when they read that, they'll never even thought about that part, did they? They're too eager to bind a burden on rather than to lift one off. So he saw Peter, he saw James, didn't see anything else, and said, I'm unknown to the churches. I was unknown to the churches of Judea by my face. They didn't know me. I could have gone in any of them and been incognito. But they heard. They were hearing something. What were they hearing? He who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith which he once tried to destroy. How about that? The destroyer is now the builder up. He who would pull down the walls of Zion now is strengthening the cords of the tabernacle of David. And they glorified God. The Geneva says for me. The New King James says in me. Certain prepositions in the Greek can be a little ambiguous at times. Let's take it both ways. They glorified God in him because they knew that to make a change from persecutor to laborer, for want of a better term, destroyer to builder, that might be better, had to be because God was in him. Had to be because God changed him. Had to be because he had a revelation. Not because Ananias preached to him, but because Jesus came to him. And they also could glorify God for him. That God had been pleased to do that, and not only do it, but give him such a work that the Gentiles were being called out of the darkness they were in by nature into the marvelous light of Jesus Christ. Paul was sowing his seed. God had prepared the ground, and the fruit rose up. The wheat standing tall. because of that. This is the way it is. That's the way it is. So, with this, we have finished the first chapter of the book of Galatians. Monday, Lord willing, 8 o'clock, we'll start with chapter 2. Tomorrow is Thursday. We're going to be looking at the 25th chapter of the book of Ezekiel, at least a portion of it, Lord willing. And then Friday, we will be continuing our look at Daniel Parker and his public address to the Baptist Society concerning the Baptist Board of Foreign Missions. Brethren, any comments, questions? Anybody have anything they'd like to add, talk about? Well, you're certainly welcome. You're certainly welcome. I certainly get a lot out of this myself. Lord gives me things to consider that some of which I never thought of before. So yes, it's good for me too. Nothing else? Down south at the end of the business meeting of the church, they say, "Are all minds clear?" If they would, they dismiss. So let's bow together. Heavenly Father, thank Thee for this wonderful, wonderful book that Thou inspired Thy apostle to write. Let us continue our look therein, and let us continually see Jesus in it. Like the apostle, our pattern. Let us see Jesus everywhere and in everything. Let us look in every page of the Word and view His grace and His glory wherever we are. May we be blessed to look unto Him, the author and finisher of our faith. For it's in His blessed name we ask. Amen. You still with me? You still with me? I got thinking this morning, that's a bad thing sometimes, about that phrase, the author and finisher of our faith. And I got thinking this, there's a group of people that believe they themselves are the author of faith, and Jesus finishes it. We call them Arminians. There's another group of people that say Jesus is the author of our faith, but we got to finish it up. There are Arminians too, but we call them conditionalists. Jesus is both the author and the finisher of our faith. See, it comes from him. He's the author of it. All right? You got that? He's the author of it. In other words, he originated it. He wrote it down. What does an author do? He writes things down. Writes it in a book, an article. He records it. Well, he records his faith in us. You with me on that? That he records his faith in us. I write my law in their inward parts. Is that what the prophecy of the new covenant is? But he's the finisher of it. He completes it. He takes us to the point. If he's given it, if he's the author, he's the one that's going to finish it. Whoever's the author. The Arminian world can say, well, you just put your faith in Jesus and he'll add to it and give you what you need to get you to heaven. No. Jesus is going to give you faith. And it's his faith. You can call it yours. I think that's quite important to realize when we talk about imputation and impartation and anything like that. Infusion, if you will. Some people don't like that term. I don't care one way or the other. But what I'm saying here is this, that if your and my sins could be imputed to Jesus to the point where he says the yoke of my transgressions is around my neck, then when he gives his faith to us, it is given to us in such a way that we can call it our faith. But we know what the origin is, and we know who the author is, and we know that it comes not from ourselves, but it's the gift of God. And therefore he gives the measure of faith as is necessary to us for whatever he brings us through. You believe that? I do. He's got to finish it. You know, if you just exercise it, well, it'll all come about. Jesus gives it to you, now exercise it. Like any other muscle, you got a faith muscle in there. Now get busy to exercise it. That's right, brother. It was once delivered to the saints. It's once kept in the saints, and it's going to be finished in them. Whew, my goodness. Finished. Completed. You're going to get enough. And you're not going to fall short. He's going to complete every bit of it. Bless your heart. Think about that. You know, like I say, when something comes to me like that, and I just sometimes want to get it out. Because I want my brethren to consider it. And I want my brethren to tell me if they think I'm wrong. If you think I'm right, well, that's good too. Still wish I'd used the Hexpla. Well, you get me a copy of it, brother, and I'll use it, I promise. Y'all ever see the English Hexpla? It was put out by Bagster, and Bagster did some phenomenal printing work. The Brenton translation of the Septuagint with the Greek on one column and the English on the other, that was a Bagster's work. For years, Morris's Concordance, though far from complete, was there. Bagster's Interlinear, um, which is still in print with a little revision. What am I thinking of? The other interlinear, the emphatic diaglott. What is the English hexapla? The English hexapla was, see if I can name them. Now, I might have to look it up. It was King James Bible, the Geneva, the Bishops, the Great, Tyndale, and Wycliffe. It's 6 translation New Testament. And I believe those were the 6 translations. King James, Geneva, Great, Bishops, Tyndale, Wycliffe. English hexapla. Hexapla means a 6 version Bible. So, there you go. If any of you ever go to the Primitive Baptist Library down there in North Carolina, there's an English hexapla line, or a copy of that line on the table in the big room, the main room, this room of the stacks. Whoa, get out. That was a cat. I'm sorry. Daenerys, you're in the way. That's my heart. I didn't think you were going to do that. All right. Anything else, brethren? Hope you've gotten some food for thought today. I hope you've gotten some something, little crumb maybe for your edification. If you did, thank God. If you didn't, blame me. And if there's nothing else, we're going to say so long, and Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. You enjoy the asides. Well, brother, I'll tell you what, sometime I think this whole thing might wind up being an aside someday. Then you'll have a lot to enjoy. Forgive me for the levity, but sometimes you just gotta laugh. All right. I'm going to shut this off if I can figure out how. I think it's this little X up here. Yes, it was.